Hi, my name is Karen Feibel, and I'll be your tour guide as we walk through some of the foundations of Schema Markup authoring. This training was developed to be a precursor to many of the specific Schema.org training modules we have published, and it's meant to give you a bit of insight into the Schema App design principles, some commonly used terminology, as well as to teach you how to create connected Schema Markup. This training was developed for individuals who will be using the Schema App tools to apply Schema Markup to their websites. And if you haven't already done so, we recommend that you view two webinars that are posted on our website. They are the 16 Benefits of Schema Markup, which also gives you a brief explanation of Schema Markup, as well as the How to Develop a Schema Markup Strategy webinar. Here at Schema App, we view the Schema Markup process as an ongoing process that contains 5 key steps, starting with strategy, through to authoring, deployment, maintenance, reporting and analytics, and often back to strategy. This particular training focuses on authoring, which is the process of marking up your pages with structured data. As we go through the training, we are going to capture some commonly used terminology. Unfortunately, there are quite a few terms that can be used interchangeably, and when you're just starting down the learning path, this can lead to confusion. We hope that by capturing these terms, you'll find it easier to make sense of all of the resources out there. Let's start with the fact that Google uses the term structured data to describe Schema Markup. And although they are the same, in this instance, we prefer Schema Markup because we feel that it's much more specific and is less likely to cause confusion. Now, you probably already know that Schema Markup, also known as structured data, helps search engines explicitly understand your content so that you can be found and stand out in organic and voice search across various devices and platforms. Your website may make sense to humans, but does it make sense to machines? And although the HTML tags generally tell the browser how to display the information, it doesn't tell the search engine what the content is about. Schema Markup was designed to provide that clarity. For each web page, the objective is to choose the most specific, accurate Schema.org type or class that makes sense for that page or content. Doing so will help to promote understanding for the search engines. This brings us to our second term. Schema.org type can also be known as class, entity, and data type. For each web page, you'll want to choose the primary Schema.org type. The more specific you can be in choosing your type, the better. The Schema App Tools contains the entire vocabulary plus extensions. If you're trying to locate some types but can't find them, reach out to us. We'll show you how to access the entire vocabulary in the settings. To determine the most accurate Schema.org type, you can either use the editor or Schema.org, both of which contain definitions that will help you select the best option. For example, let's say we were going to mark up our Schema App homepage. And to simplify things, let's assume that it looks roughly like this. What our homepage is really describing is an organization, but if we weren't 100% sure that organization was the right class or type, we could validate the description with either the Schema App editor by logging in to Schema App, choosing the Structured Data Editor, typing in organization, or using the editor's class tree, and taking a look at the definition provided. Alternatively, you could go to Schema.org, type in organization, and validate that the description fits your content. After you establish the type you'll use, Schema App will ask you to name your data item. Select something that makes sense to you and will be unique to this particular data item so you can easily identify it from the list of data items you'll eventually create. You'll also be prompted to provide the URL of the page where you want the markup to deploy. When it comes time to deploy the Schema Markup via a plugin, Google Tag Manager, JavaScript API, as an example, we'll use this to identify what it's updating so that it can pull in the appropriate markup. After you've selected your Schema.org type, in this case organization, and have started to complete the fields, you're in fact creating a data item. A data item is a specific instance of a type or a class. You might be marking up only one home page, but in other cases you might be creating several different data items for the same Schema.org type. Once you've selected and named your data item, Schema App will load a form and ask you to fill in the properties or fields associated with that data item. You don't have to fill in all the fields, but fill in those that make sense for your business. At a minimum, wherever possible, you'll want to mark up the required and recommended fields. Errors and warnings are highlighted dynamically as you run through the process. Wondering what to mark up? Typically, the more content you mark up, the better. However, as a general rule of thumb, you should only mark up the content that's visible to people who visit the web page. There are only a few exceptions to this practice, such as adding the language of your website to the markup or the currency of your products, but generally speaking, if you come across fields that should be marked up, but the content isn't visible on your web page, we recommend that you make a note to add that information to your web page so that you can mark it up. Schema.org doesn't prioritize the properties associated with a Schema.org type, but Google does, and therefore we do. Schema App organizes the properties into required, recommended, and other fields. These suggestions align with Google's required and recommended guidelines and can help you determine what you should add to your website to increase its effectiveness. While the Google errors and warnings mean that your eligibility for rich results could be at risk, it doesn't actually mean that there's anything technically wrong with the way you've written your structured data. Missing required and recommended fields aren't errors from a Schema.org perspective. In fact, in some cases, you can have perfectly good schema markup and still get errors and warnings. You should only mark up the content if it makes sense. For instance, one of our partners was optimizing a site about hay and it was giving them a warning because SKU was missing. Well, hay doesn't have a SKU, so the warning isn't even relevant. And at Schema App, we choose not to add salary to our job posting, which will also result in a warning, but we're okay with that. So strive to mark up all required and recommended fields, but only if it makes sense and you have the content on the page. When it comes to marking up your content, Schema App provides options. You may have the option of typing information into a field, or copying and pasting it, or you could even create a new data item, if there's a suitable Schema.org type available, or select a data item that you've previously created, or you can reference Wikipedia or Wikidata, which are considered trusted sites with a definition of things, also known as entities. When you start to fill in the fields for your chosen type, Schema App may suggest a proposed option, as is the case in this example. Schema App is suggesting that you may want to further define your content by leveraging the contact point Schema.org type to create a new data item. If you search Schema.org for contact point, you'll learn that it's a Schema.org type with its own set of properties. So now we have a page where the main entity of the page is organization, but for which contact point will become an embedded data item. An embedded data item can also be known as a nested data item. When you create your contact point data item, you'll be prompted to name it and give it a URL, but you've already used that URL for the home page, so you'll need to differentiate the URL for the contact point. Simply add a hashtag to the URL plus a description at the end of the URL to create a unique URL for this data item. And as you're connecting your data items to one another, you're building a knowledge graph. And in doing so, you're helping the search engines understand how your content is connected to your organization and to other things on the web. Connected schema markup is the foundation of the semantic web. Let's dig a little deeper. Your contact point has a property called area served. You have several options for marking up area served. You could create a new data item using one of the 3 proposed Schema.org types listed here, or you may prefer to use Wiki. Schema App actually services a lot of countries around the world, so it can be a little tricky narrowing in on a specific area served. If we wanted to make our services available to everyone, we could even choose the wiki description for Earth as our area served. So we recommend using Wikidata or Wikipedia to add clarity to the things that you're describing. And if given the choice, use Wikidata over Wikipedia, because Wikidata was built for machines versus people. There's this handy property available for things known as additional type, and it allows you to add a URL to further clarify what you're describing. For instance, as of today, there's a Schema.org type for dentist, but not for orthodontist. Given that the Schema.org vocabulary is always expanding, this may change in the future. Anyhow, you could choose dentist as your primary schema.org type to describe your business, but then add the wiki definition for orthodontist to the additional property field to bring additional clarity to your business. So use the property additional type to further describe a thing. Now, one data item can lead to another and another, as we've seen so far. Let's take a look at an example using a product page because products can be nice and visual. Because this web page is about a product, the schema.org type would be product, which is also main entity of page. All of the words surrounding the sandal are properties of the schema.org type product and point to content that's visible on the page, because of course you can only mark up content that's visible on the page. The properties colored in gold are properties that can be mapped to the content by simply copying and pasting text, typing, or copying and pasting a URL. Whereas the other colors are representative of properties that could match to other schema.org types, each with their own set of properties. Looking at this a different way, here again you have the schema.org type product, and below it is a list of properties associated with the product. Some of these properties will link to other schema.org types, each with their own set of properties. And in fact, in some cases, there can be several linkages before you get to that final level of clarification available in the schema.org ontology. With all of these properties and classes, things can get a little confusing. Thankfully, schema.org uses case to differentiate types from properties. For schema.org types, schema.org uses Pascal case, which means the first character of each word is capitalized. For properties, schema.org uses camel case, which means the first character is in lowercase, where the first letter of the second word is capitalized. So let's say we want to mark up this main image. Well, we actually have several images on the page, and image is a property of product. How do I know? Well, there's several ways to verify this. I could go to schema.org and type in product and scroll down to view the properties, and sure enough, image is there. But notice that schema.org is looking for additional clarification. Is this image a URL or an image object? By the way, because it is written in Pascal case, we can tell that image object is also a schema.org type with its own set of properties, so that when you mark up an image object, you'll be creating a new data item with an associated bundle of information. Okay, back to our product page. Note that there's a logo on the top left-hand side of the page that we would want to mark up, and it links to a property that links to a type that links to a property that links to a type, which of course will have its own set of properties. How can we keep track of all of this? Thankfully, the Schema App tools makes it easy to follow the bouncing ball. If you're using the editor, you can create new data items. The information associated with the data item is indented, so you can always tell where you are on the page. The highlighter captures the image object in its own section and shows all of the associated products and classes or types as they relate to one another. And although we would say some schema markup is better than no schema markup, provided that it's been done properly, when your schema markup doesn't link your content, you create what we affectionately call islands of schema markup. But sometimes it's really difficult to figure out how to relate one type to another. Schema Paths is a handy tool that does just that, and you can find it in the resources section of our website. Schema Paths will help determine the possible paths between schema.org classes or types. You simply type in both types and click to find a path. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to create a linkage between a product and a video object. After having inputted both types into the tools, you would receive the following output. Schema Paths defines the possible paths two ways. It starts with finding the paths with the product, and then it reverses the process to find the possible paths starting with video object. Now, this isn't the easiest explanation to understand, so let's break it down starting with the first option. Schema Paths is telling us that product has a property called subject of. So we would go to our product data item, scroll down to locate that property in our Schema App tools. Then it's telling us that subject of can be a creative work, which you can see from the screenshot from schema.org. And lastly, it's telling us that video object is a type of creative work. Also, video object inherits the properties from media object, which incidentally inherits the properties from creative work, which inherits the properties from thing. Now we know we can link our video to our product by marking up the subject of property under product, selecting Creative Work, and scrolling down to find the property titled Video, and then choosing Video Object and mapping the properties for Video Object to our content. And after we've done that, we've connected our video to our product. And when we've connected our video to our product and our product to our organization, we've made it easier for the search engines to crawl our content in response to a search request. Subject of is an example of a connector, but there are others, such as abouts, mentions, and has parts. Therefore, our next tip and trick is to use Schema Paths to find out ways to connect your data items to one another and use connectors to link your types. When you're marking up your content, it can be helpful to choose more than one schema.org type to describe it. Our tools allow you to do this. You're able to merge two different schema.org types and use the properties across both of them. Some commonly used examples are apartments or houses that are also products and services that are also products. The added bonus is that if you use a type that qualifies for rich results, your content can become eligible for rich results when it otherwise might not have. So our next tip and trick is to use multi-entity schema markup to bring in other properties to add additional clarity, information, and/or qualify for a rich result. Now earlier we talked about additional type, but there's also a property called additional property, and this allows you to mark up properties that aren't amongst the list of options provided by schema.org. For example, here's a list of properties associated with the schema.org type product. It's a pretty big list, but it may not have everything you require. The Schema App editor will suggest that you create a data item called property value. Property value defines relationships between a variable and an actual number or quantity. For instance, we may define shoe size as having a maximum of size 13 and a minimum of size 5. So use additional property to mark up important fields that haven't got a standard property associated with them. We frequently mark up pages that contain a list of items. An item list can be any kind of a list, perhaps a list of the top 25 songs from the previous year or a list of the top 10 attractions to see in a particular city, but they can also be specific types of lists, such as an offer catalog, which contains related offers that are offered by the same provider, which is most frequently used with products. Anyhow, I encourage you to explore these different lists by looking up the definitions via schema.org or via the Schema App editor. In fact, you can view the entire vocabulary by going to schema.org, clicking on documentation, and then clicking on the full type hierarchy. There you'll find pages and pages of options that go well beyond just things to include intangibles, actions, status, availability, offers, prices, etc. We believe that actions are going to become pretty important as people start interacting more with voice search. Today there are about 14 actions, which include create action, find action, play action, and search action, each of which allows for interaction. We often get asked if we should mark up everything on the page, so of course you could, but we recommend marking up the key elements on the page, which includes of course the main entity of page. But if you don't need to mark up everything, and remember again to only mark up content that's visible. Which brings us to our next tip and trick, which is to mark up the most relevant visible items on the page, not necessarily everything on the page. So throughout this training, we've made references to the Schema App editor and highlighter. What's the difference? Well, we recommend that you use the editor for single pages that are fairly static. Note that if you change the contents of the page, you may also have to change the markup. Whereas the highlighter is typically used for templated pages or pages that have dynamic information. Here's a visual depiction. You use the editor to mark up unique pages one by one, and you'd use the highlighter to mark up one page and then deploy the markup to all similar pages. Common use cases are products, articles, location pages, images, videos, and so on. And as you add or remove content from your website, the highlighter will dynamically update the schema markup. And that concludes our training for today. Now, we've covered off a lot of content, and I'm sure you'll have questions. Email support is available for all of our customers, and high-touch support is available for our premium and enterprise customers. We also offer additional professional services to assist with strategy and setup, managed services, or simply additional high-touch support that could be used for training or any other service you'd like assistance with. And don't forget, we have a website that's chock full of training resources. So thanks, and have fun with Schema Markup.